How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, today on Thursday, January 16th, getting closer to the divisional round here to start the weekend with the first couple games, and then on Sunday concluding with the last two. And with that being the case, we're going to start previewing some of these games coming up, starting with the Saturday games today, and then tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about the Sunday games. But not only are we going to preview some of the divisional round games, but also some more discussions around head coaching, really focused in on Ben Johnson and the rumors and reports linking him to the Las Vegas Raiders job. There's been a lot of traction building up with that. So we're going to talk about it and just my thoughts on it, and also kind of venturing out to the college realm a little bit. Marcus Freeman, the head coach of Notre Dame, getting some looks from the NFL and some teams that could be interested in him to potentially be the head coach there. So we're going to talk about that whole scenario later on in the show, plus much more on today's episode. Make sure to stick around. But also, if you guys want to get involved with the show through any questions or comments or just any opinions you have on any of the topics we talk about during these live shows, please don't hesitate to let your voice be heard. It's always great to hear your guys' input and insight into anything, and just provide another sort of perspective when we're talking about different topics on these live shows especially. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on any of the live shows, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a great way to support our channel, and we're able to see your message, read it out loud, and take the conversation maybe in a different direction. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But now that you guys are aware of that, we can start jumping into the first topic on today's rundown, looking at more of the head coaching discussions around the NFL. And this one has to do with who I would say is probably the main guy everyone's trying to bid for, Ben Johnson. If you haven't heard of him, the Lions offensive coordinator, did a great job last year, and then he's just continued his work with that very talented group of players on that offense that he has. I think especially Jahmyr Gibbs, right? He's doing a great job with him. And just the offense, I believe they're the highest scoring team in the NFL. So obviously that's going to attract a lot of people, a lot of teams, and Ben Johnson is definitely one that I would say is the most sought after at this point. And according to a recent report, surrounding some of the teams that are interested in Ben Johnson, there's been some talks with Ben Johnson regarding the Las Vegas Raiders job. And according to these reports, some of these sources say that the discussions and conversations around Ben Johnson being the Raiders' eventual head coach have intensified, in their words. Not only that, but to kind of give a little bit of context here, according to The Athletic, Tom Brady is obviously, again, if you guys weren't aware, he's going to be a prominent factor for the Las Vegas Raiders, being a minority owner, and he's part of this support group, as I've read it be called, and for the Raiders and their owner, Mark Davis, and he's going to have a pretty decent role in who the next head coach is going to be, right? Why wouldn't you ask Tom Brady in that regard? So he's got a pretty prominent role to play here when hiring a head coach. And, according to The Athletic, Ben Johnson has been a candidate that Tom Brady has pretty much zeroed in on for their head coaching position. And going forward, or even going as far as saying, this is according to Super Illustrated, that they claim that Ben Johnson originally only planned to meet with the Chicago Bears, the Patriots, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Those were the only teams that Ben Johnson initially thought that he was going to talk to and, I guess gauged his interest. But, after a reaching out from Tom Brady, Tom Brady got in contact with him somehow, and he really got him to consider the Raiders head coaching job as well, when again, Ben Johnson wasn't even really initially thinking about that position as a fit for him. But after a conversation with Tom Brady, again, according to Super Illustrated, that sort of changed the perspective for Ben Johnson. And now Pro Football Talk had sources tell them that Ben Johnson came back from that interview that he conducted with the Las Vegas Raiders with positive feelings about the team and the situation, and also Tom Brady as well. With, I'm sure they shared an interaction while he was doing that interview, and some even claiming that him and Tom Brady have also just spent a lot of time talking to each other over the phone. And if that ends up being true, it becomes pretty evident that Tom is really doing his part and his best to try and get Ben Johnson, right? Ben Johnson is definitely one that Tom Brady is certainly after, according to these, reports, right, coming back from sources close to the situation. So while it might seem a little fishy, right, because I don't know all the technicalities really with the whole minority owner situation, things like that, but it does seem a bit like an overstep from Tom Brady, if you will, right? You don't really know how much he's supposed to get involved, especially, being still a commentator with Fox. But I think it's kind of funny how it lines up within the confines of his job, and it makes it out to be sort of a coincidence, but not really, because Tom Brady, within, the limitations of his Fox job, like I mentioned, he is allowed to talk to players and coaches, right? Like as a commentator and, getting prepped for the game, right? That's the obvious part. But of course, this upcoming week, when you get some of these reports coming out about Ben Johnson being linked really to the Raiders and how that's starting to pick up steam, I think it's funny how coincidentally Tom Brady is going to be on the call for the Commanders and Detroit Lions game, right? How those two things line up, really giving Tom Brady a free pass to talk to anybody, but you know that it's going to be a bit heavily lenient to Ben Johnson, right? I'm sure they're going to have more discussions leading up to the game and things like that. And also, don't be surprised if during the game you hear Tom Brady talking up Ben Johnson a lot, right? Just as a side comment or anything like that. It wouldn't surprise me either. And I just thought that was kind of funny how that all lined up here currently where we stand. But The Athletic kind of finished off the report by saying that Ben Johnson is considered, in their words, the leader in the clubhouse above all other candidates. So much so that the Raiders are also considering hiring Lance Newmark for their general manager position. And for those of you that are unaware who the heck Lance Newmark is, Lance Newmark currently is the assistant general manager with the Washington Commanders. And don't you know it, right? That probably gives Tom Brady another pass to have discussions with him, knowing that they're going to be in the same spot this upcoming weekend. But according to the Athletics report, right, the Raiders are also really considering bringing him on as their general manager. But it connects to Ben Johnson as well and kind of flames the reports about Ben Johnson taking the Raiders job, because it would almost be like a reunion between the two, because Ben Johnson and Lance Newmark spent some time together, 5 seasons actually, in Detroit when Newmark was the senior director of player personnel for the Lions, coincided with Ben Johnson's time there, so they're very familiar with each other. I'm sure they have a decent relationship, right? So ideally, according to all these sources, right, the ideal plan for the Raiders would be to bring both those guys in. They're familiar with each other. They have prior connections and relationships, and bring them in to 2 very important spots in their organization. In an ideal world, right? But based on the NFL rules and things like that, and the fact that Ben Johnson and the Lions are still playing, we're not going to get an official announcement until they're eliminated, or I guess most likely until after the Super Bowl in this regard. So based on everything, I just laid out there, according to what a bunch of reports are saying, my thoughts on it, I didn't think that the Raiders job for Ben Johnson would pick up a lot of steam. I thought it was always going to be Chicago and Jacksonville. But to be clear, any team would really benefit from having Ben Johnson there as their head coach. I think he's going to be great, but I just really wasn't expecting it to be the Raiders, and it is exciting. If I'm putting myself in the shoes of a Raiders fan, to have two guys potentially come in and you'd hope have full power and the decision-making power, really, to build the team as they see fit. And I think that's something that not only excites fans, but hopefully for them, excites Ben Johnson to have that decision-making power and really make this roster what he feels is a competitive and very excellent team, probably very heavily based on offense, right? And, if Tom Brady likes him, I don't think many people can dispute that for obvious reasons, right, based on his criteria. And it is also exciting, right, when you think about it, and Ben Johnson and what he's been able to do with the Lions and the kind of things that he can do with Brock Bowers in that offense is another reason to get excited, right? Because Brock Bowers had a phenomenal historical season, and now if you bring in a guy like Ben Johnson to give him even more guidance and, call plays for him, he's only going to get that much better, probably exponentially better with a guy like that. So that's always, great to think about. But this team, don't get me wrong, they have Brock Bowers and everything, and we're very much projecting and talking about like Ben Johnson is already the coach. But if this were to be the case, the most interesting thing about this whole situation would be how, they approach the quarterback situation, because that's always going to be the biggest driving point about everything, right? The Raiders missed out on a quarterback last year, and you saw how that went this year. So is Ben Johnson and, that front office going to still be fond of Shedeur Sanders or something like that, or Cam Ward, or do they have their eyes on somebody else, maybe a veteran? How do they approach that? Because that's what it ultimately comes down to, right? Or the majority of it. So, yes, they got to get a quarterback. They have Brock Bowers, but still they need any sort of run game, offensive line help, and a lot of help on defense. So this is by no means anywhere near complete, but having a guidance of a Ben Johnson and things like that, I think would be the best first step you could take if you're the Raiders. So we'll see. Hopefully this is kind of gets developed quickly, just because I'd love to see where Ben Johnson goes, because he is definitely, like I said, the guy that a lot of people want to sign. So we'll see where the Raiders go, and maybe if anything else picks up, I'm sure we'll talk about it on here. But that is regarding one of the teams in the playoffs, and we're going to expand that now to the entire game coming up this weekend regarding Ben Johnson's Lions taking on the Washington Commanders. We're going to preview the night game coming up on Saturday for the divisional round of the playoffs. We're going to talk about the Commanders, the Lions, the matchups, the keys to the game, and everything that we usually do in these breakdowns. So that is coming up after the break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast here. We are a couple days away from the start of the divisional round in the NFL, so we're going to start previewing some of these matchups like I mentioned before. Saturday games today and the Sunday games tomorrow to conclude the weekdays. But, starting off with what arguably could be one of the best matchups, I would say, in this round of the playoffs, right? Because you got the Lions getting their first action of this year's playoffs after earning the number 1 seed, earning a week off as well after they defeated the Minnesota Vikings in a very lopsided victory. Not only winning the game and, winning the division and things like that, but pretty much showing everybody that they're truly the best team in the NFC. There was some doubts, with some people, I guess like myself, siding with Minnesota, but that game really proved and showed you everything you needed to see, right? From an ability, from a just execution standpoint, the Lions clearly showed that they're on a different level. So, this upcoming Saturday, they will host the only lower seed to win this past weekend in the Washington Commanders, right? Every other number or higher seed in the wild card round won, except the Washington Commanders. They were the only one to upset, technically, in the wild card round, winning 23-20 over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They surprised a lot of people, like I said, right? The Buccaneers look like the logical choice to pick, right? Playing at home, Baker Mayfield, the experience from last year as well. I'm sure pushed a lot of people in that direction, but for whatever reason, or not for whatever reason, but really for Jaden Daniels, I just felt like that gave them a good enough chance, and they ended up winning. So they got the win last week, and their superstar quarterback, Jaden Daniels, like I mentioned, had his fingerprints really all over this game. He was a threat running the ball. I believe he was their leading rusher in this game, and he was extremely accurate, which he continues to prove and show week in and week out, right? Because the running does make him extremely unique, right? It's only really him and Lamar that kind of have that build, that very slippery, just very agile and hard to even come close to kind of build that quarterback. And I would say at this point that Jaden is a little bit more accurate and a little bit more decisive with his throws. So that's what makes him overly dangerous, obviously, and what allows him to elevate the rest of his team to victories like we saw in the wild card round, right? That's what they brought Jaden Daniels in for, right? That's what they envisioned with him, and already you're starting to see the benefits of that. So that's what happened last week, and now off of that victory, the Commanders enter this game now on a 5-game win streak with a 12-5 record to finish the regular season. They're technically 13-5. And that reminds me of something that I saw today. If Jaden Daniels gets another win, he would equal Ben Roethlisberger for the most wins in their rookie season with 14. So, I mean, he's close to doing it. It's going to be extremely hard, but, he's already in that category, historically speaking about things. So I thought that was pretty interesting to kind of put it in perspective. And also, him and the rest of this offense, really to their credit, because they do have some pretty decent players, like Terry McLaurin's obviously exceptional. But as a group, I definitely feel they can get better, but they have played well enough to be the 5th scoring highest offense per game in the NFL. They've scored 28 points per game entering into this contest, and the Lions aren't too far off. They're actually number 1 in the NFL in terms of scoring. They've entered with about 32.2, I believe, points per game going into this game, and they got a 15-2 record. Obviously, they enter on a 3-game winning streak leading up into this game. And what's funny about their 2 losses is that both of them have come at home. They lost at home to the Buccaneers, and they lost at home to the Buffalo Bills. And obviously, you look at the Bucs, the Commanders just beat the Bucs. So is that something to write into? Maybe not, just because it was so early in the season, but it is interesting to point that out. And also, they've only lost one time to an NFC opponent all year, right? Outside of Tampa Bay, no one's really been able to get one up on the Detroit Lions. They're undefeated in their division, and against every other conference opponent, that nobody else has really been able to keep up with them other than the Buccaneers, right? So that's also something to watch out for in this game. Funny for the Lions, too. They're undefeated on the road, but again, both of their losses have been at home. So that is a bit peculiar as well. But the most interesting thing about this, too, to watch in this game, based on how everything goes and turns out and whether or not the Commanders can kind of keep up and stay in this game, a large part of that is going to be regarding fourth downs. And I think we got two of the head coaches that are really the least scared about going for it on fourth down, right? We're talking about Dan Campbell, who has built that reputation of going for it a lot on fourth downs, and Dan Quinn and the Commanders aren't really too far off of that as well. It's showing all the confidence that Dan Quinn has in his rookie quarterback already. So they're two of the coaches that I would say are probably the two coaches that are least afraid of the consequences of not gaining a fourth down. They're not really worried about that too much. And throughout the year, Detroit ranks fourth in fourth down attempts. They're at 33 attempts on the year, converting at a 67% conversion rate, which is seventh in the NFL. They're 22 of 33. If you convert that percentage, obviously, that's good enough for seventh in the NFL, which was a little surprising. I thought they were higher up. That's just me. That's what I thought. But it's also interesting with the Commanders because while I thought the Lions were going to be higher up, the Commanders actually rank 18th in attempts, so a lot lower than the Lions. They've gone for it 23 times, but they have the highest conversion rate in the NFL. They're converting fourth downs at an 87% rate so far through the year. That's first in the NFL, like I've mentioned. They've gone for it 23 times, and they've only failed 3 times. So that is an extremely high rate, and I'm almost positive that's only during the regular season, not taking into account the wild card round. So that's still an impressive, number because they don't go for it as much as the Lions, but the times they do go for it, they're almost always getting it. And it's going to be interesting, and we'll see how, one decision to go for it on fourth down, maybe by the Lions, affects the Commanders and vice versa, right? Who's going to kind of cave in first and get a little bit of cold feet, I would say, right? Because you want to go for it, right? And you have the opposing head coach also going for it. So you guys are kind of having like a individual battle, and I'll be very fascinated to see kind of how far they stretch it out, right? Maybe like a 4th and 3, 4th and 4, someone goes for it on a 4th and 5. It'll be cool to see how kind of far they push that limit. But that's going to be a huge deciding point in it as well, right? Keeping your offense out there, the momentum and everything like that. That'll certainly be something to watch out for. And in terms of injuries, the biggest piece of injury news for the Lions is that they're going to have David Montgomery back. And I don't mean for that to sound like lightly or anything like that. That's a huge portion of their offense because they were already looking great with just Jahmyr Gibbs. But when you have David Montgomery come back in there, it really makes it very, very tough for anybody to just really stop them or contain them all game because you got to deal with 2 guys back there, obviously. So he recorded a full participation this week in practice, so he's expected to be out there. And last week, or not last week, but 2 weeks ago for the Lions, they got a little bit of a scare with their rookie cornerback, Terrion Arnold, with a foot injury, but he's also been a full participant, so he should also be out there as well. But the only really injury to kind of keep an eye on is Kevin Zeitler, their offensive guard, who is dealing with a hamstring injury, and he still has not practiced going into this game. So we'll definitely know a lot more tomorrow about what his status is going into the game. But for the Commanders, it's just really Bobby Wagner. He's dealing with an ankle injury that has kept him out of practice, but if I'm not mistaken, he really didn't practice too much going into the wild card either. So it just might be one of those things that they just kind of hold him off of. Because, if we're being honest, Bobby Wagner doesn't really need to practice per se too much. And they could just have him out there during the games. And I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up doing that. But again, we'll know about more of that tomorrow. And that brings me now to the keys of the game for each of these teams. For the Lions, just don't let Jaden Daniels beat you. Don't let him convert first downs. Don't let him run for like 50, 60 yards on you. Really get after him, right? Once we saw kind of how they approached Sam Darnold in that high-powered offense, they got in Sam Darnold's face a lot. They brought a lot of extra bodies, and they made him really try to beat them, and they flustered him, quite honestly. So I don't think they're really going to rattle Jaden Daniels, but just getting a lot of people around him, making sure he doesn't break containment or just rush it up the middle for like 15, 17 yards, and gain first downs. I think that's going to be huge for them, and I expect them to play a lot of man coverage because I'm sure they favor their matchups over who the Commanders have on offense. And with that note, for the Commanders, the main key for them is the red zone defense because, quite honestly, I don't think they're really going to put up much of a fight against Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Like, they'll try and keep it close, but I think at some point they're going to break off some big runs and they're going to get into the red zone. But once you get into that situation, really tighten up because the run game is obviously huge for the Lions, and for the Lions, to have that aspect of their offense be so good in the red zone is a huge weapon to use. But if you're able to tighten up in the red zone and really limit them to just field goals rather than just always scoring touchdowns, that's how the Buccaneers beat them, I believe, in week 4 or something like that. So that's exactly how the Buccaneers beat them, right? The Lions just had a very tough day in the red zone. So the Commanders just got to try and take the same approach, right? Because this is one of the worst rushing defenses in the NFL. They're actually third to last. So, again, doesn't really give me much hope of them stopping them. But in the red zone, with everything much more condensed, and if you run zone coverage very well in the red zone, you force Jared Goff to be very, very accurate. And he is very accurate, but doing that throughout the duration of the game to be almost perfect is a bit tougher than just running it and scoring touchdowns. So for me, that's what the Commanders got to do. And along those lines, it brings me to the matchups for this game. For the first one I'm looking at exactly what I just mentioned, right? Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery back together again, going up against that Washington defensive line that, again, ranks third worst in the NFL. You'll probably be able to tell from the first drives how this is going to go. If the Lions are just dog-walking them up the field in the first drive to send a message, it's going to make me really nervous about the Commanders. So it's going to be huge also to kind of set the tone during the first drive. Another matchup I'm looking at is Cliff Kingsbury and calling his offense going up against Aaron Glenn, right? Two guys that could be head coaches next year. This is a great opportunity to put tape out there, right? How are you in these big game situations, calling and executing game plans and things like that? A lot of potential suitors are looking at that. So seeing these two guys go head to head and how well Aaron Glenn performed against the Vikings, we'll see if he's able to do that again against another high-scoring offense. So that'll be interesting to see that sort of chess match between the two coordinators. And the last one for me is guys like Dyami Brown, Zacchaeus, Zach Ertz, I guess I could throw in there as well. Those kind of guys, the secondary options for Jaden Daniels and the Commanders going up against the Lions secondary, because it's obvious that Terry's going to have to help out in this game, and he's going to have to contribute, obviously, but it's also going to be about those secondary guys, right? Dyami Brown had his best game, I think, of the entire season last week, and that was huge for them to get the win. So I feel like somebody else is going to have to step up. It could be Dyami Brown again, or it could be Zacchaeus, or Zach Ertz having a great game. So I think one or multiple of those guys are going to need to come through for the Commanders and Jaden Daniels. But we get to the part of the preview where we give our predictions, and I'm going to go with the Lions because unless they play like really sloppy and they show a lot of rust just from not playing, then it could be pretty close. But I just feel like it would be very uncharacteristic of the Lions and, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn to have so many things go wrong and just for them to really shoot themselves in the foot and really lose this game as much as the Commanders would have to win this game. And I just don't expect that from a team like the Lions, who have been so efficient and just so, pretty straightforward with what they want to do, run the ball, play action, things like that. They're a well-oiled machine. So I just don't see the Lions kind of just getting in their own way. And it's just a lot to ask of Jaden. It's one thing going into Tampa and beating the Bucs, but it's a whole other thing like upsetting the number 1 seed in their stadium. And I just think the guys around him, he might play great, but it's ultimately, a collective effort. And I just feel like everybody else is going to be just a step or two short. So I'm going to go with the Lions, and they're going to move on to the NFC Championship game after they defeat the Commanders. But I hope it's still a great game. That's really my main goal from these matchups. So we're not through these previews just yet because we have to talk about the first game of the divisional round coming up. After the break, we're going to preview the Texans and the Chiefs game, one of the 3 rematches that we have coming up this weekend in the divisional round. CJ Stroud is going to battle Patrick Mahomes yet again. We're going to do the exact same thing this time around the Texans and the Chiefs. So we'll be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into the action now, continuing to talk about the NFL playoffs, more on the divisional round coming up this weekend. We got the 2 Saturday games that we're previewing in today's episode. We just finished talking about the Lions and the Commanders game, and now we're going to backtrack, I guess, a little bit and talk about the first game that we actually have coming up on Saturday between the Texans and the Kansas City Chiefs. This is the first game of the divisional round, and the first game of this round is going to feature, 2 teams that just played each other a couple weeks ago. The Texans are visiting the Chiefs once again after defeating the Chargers in the wild card round the week before. Now they have another date with the Kansas City Chiefs. While the Chiefs, on their side of things, their starters enter a very familiar circumstance, a very familiar situation, right? Being the number 1 seed again, all of their stars are well rested. There's really no injuries, not to spoil it later, but there's really no injuries to talk about the Chiefs. All their players that maybe were dealing with something are all pretty much gearing to go for this game on Saturday. And they've actually not played since Christmas Day against the Steelers, right? That's the last day. You had guys like, obviously, Patrick play, Kelsey, Chris Jones, all these guys, the main starters, the main contributors, I would say, they haven't played since Christmas Day. That's almost going to be a good month, almost like a month since they've played, right? Just a week short of a month since they last played, which is insane to have that amount of time off already. In the most crucial part of it, you just kind of regenerate health, right? So that's the benefit, right? That's the experience that comes with it, and the Chiefs are no stranger to that, obviously. But like I said before, these 2 teams already met before that Christmas Day game on the 18th, which was also the Wednesday before, but actually they met on not the 18th, but the 21st. They played on the 21st last time. I forgot they played on the Saturday leading up into that game. I forgot Christmas was on a Wednesday this year. But, yeah, they already played a couple days before that Christmas Day game, and the Chiefs came out on top 27-19 on that day. One of the many one-score victories that the Chiefs have had this season. But that game, I think most unfortunately remember it for that Tank Dell injury, which is unfortunate and a huge disappointment for Tank Dell because he was dealing with that fracture, I believe, his rookie year, and now to suffer an injury like that was very, very sad to see for the Texans. And you saw how emotional, C.J. Stroud was, and I feel like that definitely changes your perspective, right? In a game like that, to see how everybody was affected by it, I'd have to think that somehow affected them going forward in that game. But now that we're a couple weeks past it, now these two teams meet each other yet again. And more on this matchup, because I feel like this has been a pretty familiar matchup in recent seasons when it comes to the playoffs, right? Based on that, Kansas City is undefeated at home so far this season, while Houston enters this game with a 5-4 record on the road. So definitely a bit more, give or take, knowing what kind of Houston Texans team you're going to get overall. They've been pretty much 500 in that category all season long. And on this matchup more, the Chiefs have won the last 4 matchups against the Houston Texans, and their last playoff game was also a victory for the Kansas City Chiefs. 51-31 was the score the last time these two teams met. And, Houston, funny enough on that, and speaking about like familiarity and similar circumstances, I guess you could say, in the playoffs, Houston is actually in almost the exact same scenario that they were in last year, right? Because last year, they got a blowout win in the wild card round. Last year was against the Browns, and now this year against the Chargers. And then they played the number 1 seed in the divisional round, and now they have the exact same situation in this year's playoffs. Hopefully trying not to lose, right? But I thought it was pretty kind of a little bit weird and a bit, I guess, unique for that same thing to happen. So much so that it's actually the second time since 1970 that a conference has had the same 4 teams in back-to-back divisional rounds that they had from the previous year, right? It's been like 50 years, over 50 years since we've had the same 4 teams in back-to-back divisional rounds. The Ravens, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Houston Texans are all in the divisional round this time again, but the Texans are not going to be playing the Ravens. Last year, the Ravens were the number 1 seed, obviously. Now the Chiefs are. So they flipped. The Chiefs are playing the Texans, and the Bills are playing the Ravens. And hopefully, if it's anything like last year, we get some more great matchups in this round, right? The Ravens and Texans game was pretty close, and also the Bills and the Chiefs game was just insane, right? Ending with I believe a Tyler Bass missed field goal, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure that was last year. So, we got a good round of games last year. We can only hope to get the same result this time around. So that leads me to the injuries, mostly so for the Houston Texans. They've had some limited participation so far through the week, like Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, Dalton Schultz, and Azeez Al-Shire, but I don't think there's anything really major to kind of report on with them. They are all probably going to play, just holding off a little bit during the week in terms of practice. So they're all limited participants up until this point. So I expect them to be out there regardless. So not much to talk about with injuries. Luckily for both teams, I guess to some respect, are pretty healthy, but the Texans are obviously missing Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. So that's mostly all of the injury news, and then we get to the keys of the game for each of these two teams, right? For the Houston Texans, the biggest thing I want to see from them is when when you're the underdogs in these playoff games, when you're trying to upset, especially, a dynasty like the Chiefs are, you're going to need not a lot of things to go your way, like I'm making it sound just lucky, but they're going to need a lot of splash plays in this game, right? Making all the big plays and really winning all the big moments in this game. Taking advantage of the big moments and making sure they come out of it unscathed, but also on the winning side of it, like turnovers, penalties, and like 50-50 balls or something like that, winning your matchups. All of those things have to really favor the Texans for them to eventually try and be in a spot to win this game, right? Make those splash plays through your pass rush, through Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, through the great coverage that you showed last week with Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter, right? You have a lot of amazing talent in some of the most pivotal spots. You're going to need those guys to play exceptional and really leave their impact in the game and force a fumble, get an interception, tip a pass that falls into the lap of a linebacker or something like that, hit a big play down the middle to Nico Collins in one-on-one coverage with Trent McDuffie, right? Those sort of individual battles, if your guys win, the Texans are going to be in the best spot they can be to win a game on the road, especially in Arrowhead. So that's what I'm thinking for the Houston Texans. And for the Chiefs, to kind of combat that, I think Patrick and Andy Reid are going to have to just try and get the ball out pretty quick. Don't hold on to it too long. And, use Patrick Mahomes a lot. He's an athletic guy, right? He can move, he could run very well. So make sure to use him. Maybe not to the extent that Josh Allen is used, but make sure that if he has an open lane to take it, gain those yards, and not just have a steady target there for Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter to just kind of tee off, right? That's one thing that we talked about with Justin Herbert. He's not very mobile. He's pretty stationary when he's capable of being, very athletic, like Josh and things like that. So use that to your advantage, obviously, right, with Mahomes, and just move the pocket. Don't just have it be a steady target. A lot of bootlegs, a lot of rollouts and things like that. Keep these guys running, keep these guys moving, and really working for a sack. Don't let them cut any corners where, other immobile quarterbacks aren't really able to take advantage of it. So that's really what I want to see from them. And they got the guys to get the ball out quick, right? Just get the ball in the hands of Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown, Travis Kelce, all these guys that you have at your disposal. Get in rhythm pretty quick and frustrate, those pass rushers that really can't get to the quarterback in like a second or so. So that's what I'm looking the Chiefs to do in this matchup. And speaking of matchups, pretty simple for this game. I have the same three matchups on here. I have Joe Thuney. They're technically one of their guards. I'm pretty sure he mostly plays guard, but in this case, going out to left tackle because of the injury to their, first left tackle and just really not having a steady player at that spot. They've tried a couple guys, but really that spot's been a worry for them all year long. But Joe Thuney's doing a pretty good job of it, but he's going to have his hands full again with Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, whoever ends up playing on that side. So if he's able to just hold his own one-on-one, it definitely makes it easier for this offensive line. And if you don't have to get the ball out quick because they're doing a good job, then that's just an added bonus as well. So that's one of the matchups I'm looking for. Another one, pretty simple, Nico Collins against Trent McDuffie. I thought Trent did a pretty good job with him, guarding him in their first game, and he's going to have to do the same thing again because Nico's really the main guy, obviously, that CJ's trying to get the ball to with all the injuries. And if you're the Chiefs defense, right, I expect them to play a lot of man coverage anyway and, send a lot of guys at CJ Stroud, really forcing CJ to have like John Mechie or Robert Woods or Hutchinson. These guys are going to have to, essentially beat the Chiefs, right? That's going to be the Chiefs' game plan a little bit. And it starts with Trent McDuffie going up against Nico Collins. If Trent's able to hold his own and take Nico out of the equation, then that's a huge swing in their favor, obviously. And that's the second matchup. And the last one I have on here is just defensive lines for both teams going up against their running games, because the Chiefs can throw Pacheco at you, they could throw the rookie running back at you, they could throw Kareem Hunt at you, Xavier Worthy when he's back there as well. They got a lot of guys that they can incorporate in their running game, and that's something that's been very prominent with them this year. And on the other side, the Texans really didn't have a lot of success with Joe Mixon in the first game, right? And I think that's going to have to obviously change, or we're going to see the same result. So how successful the Texans can be versus how, I guess, efficient the Chiefs can continue to be going back to their last game as well. So those are all the matchups. And in terms of predictions, I think this one was a pretty easy one for the number one seeds. I'm going to go with the Chiefs anyway, because they're the Chiefs. I'm not going to bet against Patrick or Andy Reid, but also like the Chargers made a lot of mistakes that hurt themselves last game, and it kind of buried the mistakes that the Texans made as well, and they were just able to overcome it because the Chargers made more mistakes than they did. And in this game against the Chiefs, they're not really going to have too many of those opportunities, right? You might get one, but if you're not able to be on your A+ game for 60 minutes, usually it ends up finishing in a way like the Chiefs just outlast most of their opponents, and most of their opponents just end up, just kind of falling off, right? Not being able to keep up. So that's really my biggest, deciding factor in all of this. And I mean, if Stephon Diggs was playing and Tank Dell was playing, it would be a whole nother, situation, because, I'm sure Stephon Diggs wants to beat the Chiefs more than anyone, and especially with the opportunity to play the Bills in the conference championship, how much of a movie that would be, but obviously that's not possible. So they got a lot of injuries, and you want to talk about, offensive lines being shaky. The Texans had C.J. Stroud as one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the NFL this year, and I don't think that's going to hold up against, obviously, Chris Jones and George Karlaftis and these guys. So that's also going to be one that I'm pretty worried about, honestly, with the Texans, especially if they can't get the ball to Nico. It's going to look a bit discombobulated, I would say. So I'm going to go with the Chiefs. They're going to move on. Nothing new, really. So we're going to go with the Chiefs. They're going to move on and beat the Houston Texans. And we'll talk about the other games tomorrow. But for right now, for the rest of this show, we're going to talk about some more news regarding head coaches. This time extending it a little bit to college football and the reported interest of the Chicago Bears in Marcus Freeman. If you're unaware who Marcus Freeman is, he's the Notre Dame head coach currently. He's going to be playing for the national championship on Monday, and his recent success with the Fighting Irish has garnered the attention of the Chicago Bears, who are obviously looking for a head coach. So we're going to talk about that potential reality, right? Marcus Freeman, could he at any point soon or later join the NFL ranks? We're going to discuss that and everything surrounding that when we return after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back now quickly on the show to continue discussing from our previous, segment at the beginning of the show regarding the appointment of potentially Ben Johnson to the Las Vegas Raiders. Now we're going to talk about Marcus Freeman. Not really a name associated with the NFL really this year. He's obviously doing all of his work at the college level, right? Doing a great job at Notre Dame. He's going to be playing for a national championship this upcoming Monday, but his success and, the way he's improved and his development has gained the attention of a lot of people in the NFL. And what stands out about, Marcus Freeman and really the connections to the NFL is that really with the Chicago Bears, I should say, during this extensive, head coaching search that they've been on, rightly so. I remember at one point, their general manager, Ryan Poles, saying that that we may see some unexpected candidates for them interviewing for their head coaching position, really because they just wanted to cover all the bases. They wanted to be very thorough about it and really just turn all possible stones to make sure they get the ideal candidate in there to be their head coach, because obviously they know the importance of what they're dealing with, right? They got Caleb Williams in the end, but now that you actually have him, you can't mess it up and not take advantage of it and just have like another Justin Fields situation, right? So this is as important as any decision that we're going to see this offseason. So obviously Ryan Poles made that statement because he knows the severity of their next move. So now we get to this report, right, about Marcus Freeman, and it definitely fits what Ryan Poles is saying, right? I was not expecting to be talking about Marcus Freeman in any relationship to the NFL, at least not yet, because of his early success so far at Notre Dame. I just felt like it's a bit early, but I'm not going to get into it yet. I'm first going to, let you know what the report said. It came from the NFL Network this past Sunday that Chicago would like to have an interview with Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman. And while he's like knowing from an outside perspective what Marcus Freeman is like based on, some of the quotes he said and, just watching some content on him, there's no way he's taking like any calls or anything like that right now. He's 110% engraved in trying to win this national championship. So it's been, a couple days now since this report's come out, but I don't expect any sort of interview until after the national championship. So that's where, we haven't really seen anything regarding an interview with Chicago and Marcus Freeman yet, but I still think it's a possibility that it is coming up right after the national championship, right? And on that note, while he's got, the national championship to prepare for, it hasn't stopped the NFL from noticing him and, talking about him, obviously, sooner rather than later. What he's doing is getting a lot of attention, right? And not just the success on the field, but also I think what's really attractive of him from a head coaching perspective is how you hear him talk in some of these press conferences, right? How, very like just straightforward, and there's no like sarcastic or any sort of, like funny business around him, I guess is the best way to say it, for lack of a better term, right? He's very serious and intentful about his job and the kind of program that he wants to build there at Notre Dame. And I think what the NFL has also noticed, going back to the performance aspect of it all, is that he's only in his third season as the head coach of Notre Dame, and he has a 14-1 record this year. They're in the national championship. He has a 33-9 overall record in his 3 years there, and he's improved that record each and every year, right? He's had some head-scratching losses for sure, but still, you can't ignore what he's doing at Notre Dame, and especially this year, right? In the first year of the expanded playoffs and things like that, and really having Notre Dame in this competition where in the old format they might not have made it, and the way that he's performed, and not only how he's performed, but along the way during this run, beating some high-profile opponents like Indiana, and how impressive they were in some of these games. I think most people were still going to go with Notre Dame, but that was an impressive win just based on how they won. Also, beating Georgia and Kirby Smart as well, a established, very well-known program in college football. Notre Dame was able to beat them, through their identity and how they play, tough defense, running the ball at an efficient level. They were able to defeat Georgia, right, one of the favorites. And then this past round, they played Penn State in a game where most people were siding with Penn State. And again, through the same way, great defense, tough running through Riley Leonard, and just making and winning the key moments, Notre Dame was able to win again. So they not only beat Penn State and James Franklin, Georgia and Kirby Smart, and Indiana as well. That's also, holds its weight, certainly, with some of these NFL teams, right, looking for their next guy to lead their franchise. And it's why Chicago reportedly, in their words, have done an extensive research on Marcus Freeman for months, is how they put it in this report. So it's clearly something that the Bears have in mind, and they've surely noticed the leadership aspect of it, right? The player development, the excellent clock management, if we're going to get really niche about this whole situation, the in-game changes, the calls that he makes and things like that, able to pivot when something's not going well, and just really managing and controlling the game to the best of his advantage and getting the best out of his players. Like Riley Leonard, he might not be the best passer necessarily, but in those crucial moments when you got to have it, and even credit to Marcus Freeman also for really leaning into his ability to run and having success that way, is another reason why I think a lot of people are coveting Marcus Freeman for an NFL coaching gig as well. So all of the good things are obviously there with Marcus Freeman, who is only still like 39 years old, and really on the brink of such a career milestone, potentially this upcoming Monday. I want to say that first on this topic of, should Marcus Freeman consider a move to the NFL? I think my answer would be yes, but just not yet. I think it's a bit early. Like I mentioned before. In 2025, I feel like Notre Dame is still just it's just like I said, they're just on the brink of really having a special, run here. I think this is really the beginning of it, of being like a established playoff team with Marcus Freeman, at least maybe for just one more year. But if they're able to, get over the hump and win the national championship, that's going to do wonders for their football team, for their program, for the university as well, and, for years to come, right? Because everyone is going to notice that and look at Notre Dame differently, right? And he's going to obviously get a lot of credit for it, and I just feel like that's a special thing to be part of. And based on Marcus Freeman, who he appears to be, just again, from an outside perspective, he was promoted to be the head coach after, he was an assistant coach, and very young, still a very young head coach, and probably feeling like he really had to do a lot to build this program up as the leader of it. I'm sure that he wants to have some years there and really benefit and really enjoy where he's brought Notre Dame to, essentially. So I feel like just making a move to the NFL, while it is intriguing, it's really not going anywhere. If he wins the national championship, or really if he loses also, Notre Dame is still gonna have a lot of attention and a lot more, notoriety going forward when it comes to, these big games and performing at the biggest stage. That narrative has sort of changed, right, I would say. So with Marcus Freeman, and he can still do a lot more in college football, I believe, with Notre Dame than kind of just rushing to the NFL in 2025 or something like that, right? I still feel like he's got a lot to do with Notre Dame, and again, if he continues to have success, there's 31 other teams that are going to be interested in Marcus Freeman at some point over the next, few years, right? The NFL is really not going anywhere. And really, I just mentioned Chicago as being interested because obviously they're doing their head coaching search. But I just feel like if it's not Chicago this year, and if nobody else is interested, if Notre Dame, again, we're talking about them at this point next year, there's going to be other offers. There's probably going to be more offers by that time. So there's no rush in anything. He's still extremely young, and he could have, like, again, a lot of influence and a lot of success at Notre Dame, sort of like the conversation we've had with Dion at Colorado, right, and really making that his own. I think Marcus Freeman has an opportunity to do that here, and he's already started to do that this year. And again, if he's able to do that and then leave it in a spot where he feels comfortable after a couple years there, then he can make the move. But really, at this point in time, for him to consider a move to the NFL in the next year or two, I think that would be a bit too early. We'll see. This is not the last time we're going to talk about Marcus Freeman being connected to the NFL, but it's just the start of it, and I think it's warranted for sure. But like I said, it's probably going to be a couple years before we see anything really kind of cement itself. But that is all that we have on the head coaches in today's episode, but we have one more topic to get to regarding the Cleveland Browns and just kind of giving an overview of their future, because we didn't talk about it on this show, but obviously the setback that Deshaun Watson suffered really puts this Browns team in a real problem, obviously, going into next year. And how does that affect what they do in the draft, in the offseason, with Myles Garrett also, right? If you were unaware, that's also something that they kind of have to manage there. So we're going to talk about it, and I'll inform you guys more on all the details regarding the Cleveland Browns going forward when we return after this break. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, and I wanted to cover a topic that I kind of forgot to cover a little bit regarding Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns in regards to the overall, general topic that I wanted to get to just on the Cleveland Browns as a whole, because I think Deshaun Watson and obviously the news of him suffering that setback with his Achilles rehab and how the news came out about, him re-rupturing it and there being a lot of doubts around him going into 2025, how he could miss a big portion of the season is obviously huge news that happened last week. But I think it's interesting to kind of piece it together in regards to the Cleveland Browns, because they got a lot of things to figure out this offseason. And after a disappointing 3-14 season and the news of Deshaun Watson, it's all, in a very delicate spot right now. And I say delicate because you got those things happening, right? And then towards the end of the season, we had some comments made by Myles Garrett that kind of raised the antennas in Cleveland, right? The way he was kind of talking and how, I guess, cryptic would be the best way to say his message sounded when he was talking about, he was asked about like a potential rebuild and his thoughts on that with the Cleveland Browns. And this is what he had to say on that first before I get to his latest response, just recently after the season. But this is what Myles Garrett first said, I think around week 16 when they were playing the Bengals, and he was asked about a potential rebuild and just basically how he would feel about it. And he was pretty honest. He said, first of all, I want to win. I want the Browns to be able to put me and us in a position to win. I'm not trying to rebuild. I'm trying to win right now. I want that to be apparent when the season's over and we have those discussions. I want them to be able to illuminate that for me, illustrate that for me, so that can be something that I can see in the near future. So pretty much he laid it out there, plain and simple for the Browns, right? Like, he's not in any sort of mindset to just accept that the Browns, I guess, are going to be not tanking, but that he's just going to be okay with them being on the losing end of things for a year or two to go, going forward, that he's just supposed to be okay with it. He pretty much said it plain and simple there that he's not okay with that, and he didn't directly ask for like a trade or anything like that, but the way he's talking, you can kind of assume that if they were to keep losing, or if they were just to display anything to Myles Garrett that kind of suggests that they're not really going out there to make this team a true competitor, then they could have discussions about his future going forward and how he's just not going to accept anything less than being a competitive team. He's not going to be for the misery years that the Browns have had, right? And he shouldn't, obviously, because of the kind of player that he is, right? He definitely deserves to win right now, like he said. And it's something that has seemed to have become a little bit more positive, I would say, over the last couple weeks, right? Because after the season has ended, and if you guys watched the recent episode of Hard Knocks, he had a different tone about it now. On that episode of Hard Knocks, he said something along the lines like, how are we going to make the most of the talent that is here, and that they're actually closer than some people may think when it comes to, turning that corner and being competitive. So he was talking to general manager Andrew Berry in that clip, actually. So it seems like whatever conversation they had, or whatever sort of dialogue, I guess also, it made Myles kind of feel a bit more optimistic about it. And he said it, he said that they're actually closer than a lot of people think when it comes to making the Browns competitive again. And it's a relief, certainly, because it kind of seemed like Myles could be pretty straight up about maybe asking for a trade if he felt like the Browns were really not going to be in a spot to compete going forward. But they obviously said something that he now believes in. And despite his positive outlook, it's still an interesting topic to think about, because I do agree with him, because Cleveland does have great talent, especially on that defensive side of the ball. And with that, you can do a lot, right? And they have been able to do a lot. I mean, just going back to last year, they were in the wild card round and things like that, right? And you got guys like Myles, obviously, like Denzel Ward on that side. Grant Delpit's obviously back there as well. And they got some good playmakers on that side of the ball. Their defensive coordinator, Jim Schwartz, is very good, and he's helped them keep that standard over the last few years that he's been there. Well, that's all true, and I agree with Myles, right, about the talent and things like that. Their offensive line, too, is not that bad. Nick Chubb, it was always going to be hard for him to perform coming off of that nasty injury, so I expect him to be better. He's still a very impactful player for them. Just this year was always going to be tough, and Jerry Jeudy showed you some things as well. You can throw in David Njoku. With all that being said, and the positive outlook that Myles Garrett now has, it just always falls to the quarterback situation, right? It's hard to ignore it, obviously, because a bunch of teams can tell you how talented they are and how successful they have been over the last couple of years, but without that quarterback, right, it always just ends up being underwhelming and just disappointing, right? I mean, just look at the Vikings, right? It was last year with Kirk, very talented team, just unable to do it. I know Kirk was hurt, but even a year before that, in the playoffs and things like that, losing to the Giants and the Browns, same thing, being successful, being in a good spot to have the talent and everything like that. We saw it at the beginning of the year where they had all this great talent, but unfortunately, Deshaun just hasn't really panned out to be what they had hoped for and what they traded a ton of draft capital to the Houston Texans, basically to build the team that they have now. It obviously looks bad for the Cleveland Browns, especially because they gave Deshaun all that guaranteed money. So those are the negatives about that, right? Obviously, trading so much for Deshaun Watson, paying him so much money, and just still to this point, not having him look settled in at all, being riddled with injury is always very tough for anybody, but Deshaun also, with all those expectations on him, has also been battling with that, and you can't even really, have him get another opportunity out of it, because that's where we get into this season and how this could be one of the biggest off seasons for them, because even if you did want to give Deshaun another opportunity, now he has this injury setback, right? So you're in a really weird spot where, the discussion now is, what do you do at quarterback, right? Deshaun probably won't be there, so you have the number 2 overall pick to, there's a bunch of things you could consider now, and they're going to be things that the Browns have to kind of wrestle with over the offseason, and then we're going to get a real understanding of where this organization is going to go, right? What's the answer? A quarterback is one of it. Do you use that second overall pick, to maybe draft a quarterback? You can, right? Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are going to be there. One of them is going to be there. So do you use that very coveted draft pick to draft your quarterback? Or maybe you use it to trade for more draft capital. You move back and improve another position on this team. But then if you do that, you're probably going to have to go with a veteran quarterback. And do you feel like any of these veterans are really going to make you a contender going forward in 2025, right? Like Sam Darnold, Kirk Cousins, like Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, any of these guys? Do you really feel like they're going to take you to where you want to go in 2025? Do you feel like essentially that's going to be worth it for you over the next year while, Deshaun obviously comes back and gets healthy, right? Is that something do you want to kind of explore? Or, do you consider in any way try and take advantage of this not take advantage of what you have with Myles Garrett, but if there comes a point where things get a little bit icy and maybe Myles isn't happy, do you even consider the possibility of trading Myles and getting a bunch back for him and improving the team that way in different areas? Do you even consider that as an option? Because the statement that you guys see on your screen is what made me think about, Myles Garrett and his future. Because after he said that, then the news came out about Deshaun Watson, and I was thinking like Myles is probably going to ask for a trade now, because if they have no quarterback, then there's really no clear path to prosperity, essentially, in 2025 for the Browns. But he had this conversation with Andrew Berry, and he seems like he's in a more positive spot about it. But, you never truly know. It could, just go, it could make a sharp turn left one day, and, this situation gets pretty ugly. And then is that something do you even consider if you're the Browns and maybe trading him to improve the rest of this roster, right? Is that something that you're even going to consider? And, my thoughts on just all of that and all these questions and scenarios that I'm throwing out is if Myles asks for a trade at some point during the offseason or during the season or something like that before the trade deadline, that's the only kind of exception I'm going to make for moving Myles. Because if not, I wouldn't really consider that, because yes, you could get a lot back for Myles, but there's no guarantee, or there's really little possibility that you find another player as good as Myles Garrett right away. So that's really something that wouldn't cross my mind. And, as we see every year, and especially with Cleveland, finding a quarterback is obviously extremely tough, right? And not going anywhere, it's not really going anywhere drastically, without a quarterback. That has to be the number one priority, and I think they'll probably end up keeping Deshaun Watson for one more year and then parting ways with him, because it would be pretty harsh to just cut him this year while he's, rehabbing and everything like that. I feel like they wouldn't do that. So my feeling around it is that they're going to keep Deshaun this year and try to sign a very cheap, team-friendly deal with a veteran quarterback. And then along those lines, I would also trade down in the NFL draft, trade that number 2 pick to like the Raiders or something like that if they want to go after Shedeur Sanders, and see what other improvements you can make, right? It's a tough situation, right, because of the Deshaun injury and Myles Garrett and his future and things like that, but it can be turned into a pretty positive situation if they play their cards right. They find a veteran quarterback that they like, that they feel like can make them competitive, right? It seems a little bit bleak, but it can be done. We saw the Steelers do it this year, and nobody really thought they would be competitive at all. So it can be done, and with that number 2 overall pick, you can do a lot with that, certainly. So it's very delicate. It's a very, walking on eggshells sort of situation, but they're going to have to get it right, or else, they do face a reality where, everything just kind of is crumbling around them. So it's going to be a huge offseason for them with all these decisions that they have to make, obviously. So we'll keep an eye on all of that as we continue to do the show. But for today's episode, that is going to wrap up everything that we wanted to talk about. I wanted to thank you guys for joining me on today's show, and a reminder to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more of the Chip Shot Football Podcast, check out the Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube, where you can find more coverage and just a breakdown of the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Again, thanking you guys, and a reminder to join me again tomorrow for the last episode of the week, and just going more into the wild card round and dissecting everything about the matchups on Sunday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great.